Hey guys, what's up? I'm going to get straight into the UI stuff. So if you guys haven't seen the previous lesson, make sure you check it out because I cover a lot of the basics of UIs, such as how to create windows, how to work with layouts, and how to create buttons and stuff like that. And in this lesson, I'm going to get a little bit deeper. We're going to focus a little bit more on the button command flag because really that's the bread and butter of UIs. You have a bunch of buttons, and when you hit the buttons, you want the buttons to do something. And the button flag is a little bit awkward to work with, and I can show you guys some examples of why, and really at the end of the day show you guys how to work around the awkwardness. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so I've got this script here which I showed in the previous lesson at the beginning. And when I run it, I get this UI, and if I have a bunch of objects, just to quickly recap what this script does is, I can store these selections inside of these different fields. And whenever I want, I can recall these selections in whichever order I want, obviously, based on which button I click, it's going to select the corresponding stored object. So that's what that does. And we're going to do that by the end of this lesson. There's an example I want to show you guys before we get into writing that script, and that's this whole button function, the awkwardness of this button command. And it's going to take a little bit of work to get around the awkwardness, and that's what I'm going to show you guys now. So when I run this, you can see I just get a window with one button, and when I click on the button, it's going to execute this test function. So what does this test function do? It's just taking in an arbitrary number of arguments, and it's just printing those arguments. So nothing special there. So I can just give it any number of arguments I want. I can even give it Bob, let's say. And then when I run this code, you can see it's just printing out the inputs that are coming through to this test function. Nothing special. And when I don't give it any inputs and I run this function, you can see I get nothing back. It just prints an empty tuple. And that's what you'd expect to see. But what's confusing is down here in this button, when I pass this test command, this test function that I've defined up here, what's happening is it's still passing an argument. So when I run this, you can see it's passing this false Boolean into this test function. Even though there's no false down here, I'm not saying like execute false or anything like that. There's no false being defined. This command and this particular flag, it's still doing something very unpredictable, and it's passing this false Boolean. How do we get around that? Well, and more importantly, like, why is this an annoyance? Well, let's just say I define this function where I just want to do something, perhaps create a cube, cmds.polycube. So when I run this test function, it just creates a cube. So let's execute it. Now you can see it's just created a little old cube down there. And anytime I run this, it just creates more cubes. Okay, so that works well and dandy. And when I run this code to define this UI, when I hit this button, I expect it to just create a cube. But when I hit it, I'm getting an error. It's saying test takes no arguments and 1 is given. So it's trying to pass that false Boolean to this test function. And this test function doesn't actually take any arguments. So what I can do is I can throw away that argument. So I can use underscore. And underscore is a convention that's used often in Python, where it means, hey, let's just store a temporary variable that we don't want to use at all. Let's just throw it away. It's just a convention for throwing away variables that you don't want to use. So now when I run this, let's close this guy and let's run this again. Now when I run this, you can see it's creating the cube, because we're taking that false and we're discarding it. We're not using it anywhere else within this code. So, that's one way to get around this annoyance. And another way to get around it is to wrap this in a string. So I can put this whole thing in a string, and I can do open bracket, close bracket. So that's another way. So I'm executing it within this string. So when I run this, hit the button, you can see it creates there, and we didn't need to, throw away the false. So that's another method. And we can't exactly do this. So if I remove the string, this isn't going to work, because what this means is when I run this script, it's going to execute this test function, not when I hit the button, but when I run the script. So it's going to execute the test function. It's going to try to take a return value from the test function, and then it's going to try to use the return value as the button command. So when I hit the button, it'll actually be trying to use the return value of this. So this isn't going to work because the return value of this script is none. So when I run this, you see it's saying type error, invalid arguments, expected a string or a function, but instead got none type, because this test function returns none. So if I do something like my variable, and then I do test, and I run this code, when I look at my variable, you see I get nothing. And if I say type my variable, just to see what type it is, you can see it's none type. So it means there's none. It's equivalent to saying none like that. So that's what is happening here. That's why this code doesn't work. And that's why you have to kind of wrap it in a string. And this is, Maya's way of trying to get around this problem. But this is also a little bit awkward using a string there. Let's say I have a variable here. Let's just say my variable is equal to 10. And then I want to pass 10 here. And maybe I can do something like for I in range 10, cmds polycube. Maybe let's not use 10. Let's use range num. And let's say num there. Okay, so what I want to do is say, hey, my variable is equal to 10. So when I hit the button, it's going to pass my variable into this test command. And then based on whatever number this is, it's going to create X amount of cubes. So I can do something like my variable like this to pass it into there. Now this isn't going to work because this is wrapped within a string. So my variable can't actually access anything outside of this string. So when I run it, it's going to error out. When I hit the button, you see I'm getting an error because, first of all, this isn't taking it. It's not getting any inputs. So, it's erroring out because it's getting no inputs into there. And that's because we're not actually passing anything into there. This is not being defined here. But what I can actually do is do something a little bit tricky like this, where I wrap this code and I concatenate it. But I can't concatenate this because it's a integer, and integers can't be concatenated with strings. So I'll have to convert it to a string. You can see how confusing it's getting already. But this actually works. So if I just delete those cubes for now, when I hit this, you can see I get 10 cubes. And if I change this number, let's just delete all that. Let's just change it to maybe 5 and run this again. Hit the button, you can see I get 5 cubes. So this code is working, but you can see how confusing this all is because I am having to do some sort of string concatenation. If I have a variable that's a number, I have to convert it to a string before I can concatenate it. It's all very confusing. And there's a much better way to do this. And it's to use a concept known as a closure. So what a closure is it's a way to define a function that can access variables outside of itself. So I'll just come and create a new tab and quickly show you what a closure is. So I'm going to say something like wrap function. And then down here, I'm going to say wrapper, def wrapper. And at the very end, I'm going to return wrapper. And let's just say pass here. And nothing there. Okay, so what's going on here? When I execute this function, this wrap function, what it's doing is it's defining a function within a function. So it's defining this function and it's returning this function. So what I can actually do is say my function is equal to wrap function. And let's just do something like print hello world in there. So when I run this, the return value is actually a function. So I'm returning a function. So when I run this, you can see the result is an actual function. And then I can take this function, which is my function, and then I can execute it like that. And you can see it's printing hello world. So it's executing this function now. So that's what a closure is. But I mean, it's not really a closure just yet because I haven't passed a variable in here, but I can do something like string input. And instead of printing hello world, I can print string input. So this is where it gets really cool. So I can pass any string here. I can say hello world here. And this inner function can access values outside of itself. So you can access this outer variable string input. So when I run this now, you can see it's working much the same, but the difference is this is being defined outside of this function. And that's what makes closures so powerful, is you're creating a little bit of an environment, like a little mini environment with variables outside of this function that it can access. So we're going to use that in this example here. So instead of my variable and then doing all that confusing stuff, I'm going to make a little bit of a closure. So I'm going to say wrapper, or just say wrap function. Take this number and inside here define a function which will create these cubes. So I'm going to say wrapper, and this wrapper function is what will create all these cubes, not this wrap function. And then I can return wrapper. So now I'm returning this function that creates all these cubes. And there's one last thing to do. So this isn't going to work straight out of the box because of that annoying false. If you remember how when we had that test function, this command flag would always pass that false boolean to the function. So when we run this, we return this value, and it's going to try to pass false to this function here. So what we can actually do is discard it like we were doing before. So now here I can do wrap function, and we can pass our variable, which is my variable. And then, when we hit the button, what it's going to do is this is going to execute when we run the script. And when it executes when we run the script, it's going to create this wrapper function, which gets executed when we run the button. And this wrapper function will discard the false boolean, but then it can also take a variable, because we've done a little bit of a closure up here where we pass the variable when we run this script. So it can actually access that variable in memory. So it's just a cool little way to get around all the problems of this command flag. So when I run this now, I can delete all these cubes. I'm going to hit the button. You can see it's creating all 5 of these, and I didn't have to do any random string concatenation around here. And if I have many buttons, I can use this closure technique in order to wrap all my button functions. And that's exactly what we're going to do now in order to create that selection script. So let's delete all that and let's start to write our little selection script and expand upon this idea that we've kind of covered here with closures and wrapping functions and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to do import maya.cmds as cmds. And then what I want to do is I want to create my little button wrapper function. So I'm just going to say button wrapper. And in here, I know I want to wrap some sort of function. And then what I can do is I can return this wrapped function. Maybe I should call it wrapped, just to be a little bit clearer. And in here, I'm just going to say pass for now. So what I want to do is I'm just going to start to write the bare bones skeletons of all this code. Okay, so I know I need to define a window somewhere. So I'm going to call this my selector window because it's our little selector UI. I'm going to say pass there. And I know this selector UI needs to run a couple of different functions when we select an object. So if I have a cube, when I select this object, I know I want to store this selection somehow. So if we just revisit this code, you can see we have a little button that stores a selection, and we have another button that will select our object. So I know we need two different functions, one to store and one to select. So let's just define those now. So I'm going to do store selected. Let's just say pass for now. And then I also have something to select stored. And let's also pass for now. Okay, so now I've kind of written the bare bones, the skeleton of our little script, our little UI script, and we can start to fill some of this stuff in now. So let's create the UI first. That's the first thing I'm going to concern myself with. I'm going to, let's just define this window. I'm going to do cmds.window, and let's give the window a title, and let's just call this selector. Selector's fine. And let's define a width and a height. I'm going to say this is 200 by 300. And let's not forget to show our window. So cmds.show window. And which window do we want to show? We want to show this window that we just defined up there. And before I run the script, I just need to execute this selector window function down there like that. So now when I run this, I get a little window, which is 200 by 300, nothing crazy there. Let's start to define the internals of this, okay? So I'm going to do cmds.column layout. And what this is doing is just creating some sort of master layout that will encompass all the internal layouts and the internal widgets, like the buttons and whatnot. And I can even store this in a variable called master layout, which we may or may not use later on. Okay, so then next thing I know is we need a text field. So we have a text field. When we look at this code here, we have this text field there, and then we have a couple of buttons. Okay, so I'm going to define a text field. I'm going to define a couple of buttons. So button 1, button 2, and if I run this code, you can see I get a text field and I get 2 buttons, but it's not laid out the way I want at the moment. So there's a few things that we need to do to make this, a little bit closer to this layout that we have in this other script. Okay, so the first thing I notice is nothing is scaling with this window, nothing stretching the width of this window. And that's because we need to add a little flag into our column layout, which is adjustable column is equal to true. Now when I run this, you can see everything's scaling with this window now. It's spanning the entire width, and that's what we want. And that's this little flag there. That's what that does. And the next thing is, well, these buttons aren't laid out quite the same as, what we have here. We have a text field followed by a button in the same row. And then we have this select store button on a different row. So how do we do that? Well, at the moment, we just have one layout, which is a column layout. We need to have a row layout in order to have buttons side by side. So I'm going to do row layout like that. And if I run this code, it's not going to work just yet because we need to define, how many columns are in the side of this row. So I can say number of columns is equal to 2 because we have one object here and another object. So column 1, column 2. And this is on a separate row entirely, so we don't need to consider that guy. So when I run this code, it's still not going to work because it's still too many children. It's trying to put all 3 of these objects inside of this row layout, and there's only 2 columns. If it was 3, this will work. You can see it's putting all these on the same row now, but that's not what I want. Okay, so what I actually want is this button, this last button, to be in its own row. So what I can actually do is just parent this button, not to this row layout, but to this master layout. So I'm parenting this thing to one layer above. And we can use the set parent command to do that, if you remember from the previous lesson. So I can just do set parent ... and that'll parent this one level above. So when I run this now, you can see I get a button on the side, but now this button's at the bottom. Okay, and instead of ... we can be a little bit more explicit. We can actually specify the layout that we want to set the parent to instead of just, a relative arbitrary ... So, if we had another layout above, it'll set it to that other layout. But if you wanted to be very specific, we can set it to a specific layout. and this will give us the same result as the dot dot. Okay, so moving on. You can, if I run this code, you can see these aren't scaling no longer with the width of this UI. So we also need to add an additional flag here, adjustable column. And if you remember from the previous lesson, adjustable column inside of a row layout actually takes an integer. So rather than a Boolean up there, we need to give it a column number, which is the adjustable column. So I want to say column 1 is the adjustable column, and column 1 being the text field there. So when I run this, you can see now first column is the one that's adjusting to the width of this layout. Okay, perfect. Next thing I want to do is give these buttons some labels rather than just being called button 29, whatever, you know, it's a little bit confusing for a user. So what you can actually do is pass it a label, and I want to say store. And I want to give this other button a label of select stored. So when I run this, you can see store and select stored. Great. And now these don't do anything at the moment because we haven't given it the command flag just yet, but we'll get around to that. There's one more thing I want to sort out, which is the fact that we can type inside of this text field. And that's not exactly what we want. So we don't want users to be able to affect this text field. We want the script to be what adjusts the text field. So when I hit the store button, it'll store the name of whatever I have selected, rather than users being able to type something random in there, which might error out because, you know, there's no objects by the name of like this random thing. So it can't actually store or select that. So to make this text field not editable, we just need to add an additional flag here in this text field command. And let's call this editable is equal to false. So that's what this flag does. It makes it not editable. Let's run it. And you can see now I can't edit. You can see it's grayed out. I can't actually type anything in there no longer. You know, it's actually just trying to manipulate the viewport now, which is perfect. So now we've set up our UI, the bare bones of our UI. We need to start hooking it up to these commands here. So I have a command to store a selected object, right? So we need to, before we do all these commands, we need to finish off our button wrapper function, because we need our button wrapper in order to place inside of these button command flags. So if I put this command flag here, I want to execute, you know, the store function, but I have to wrap it first. So I'm going to use this button wrapper down here, but this button wrapper at the moment has no context of whatever commands we need to execute. So I want to pass the button wrapper a function, and I also want to give the button wrapper some, you know, some variables, you know, variable arguments and variable keyword arguments that it can access inside of this wrapped function. So what I'm going to do is when I run this, it's going to return a function, and when I execute the return function, I want to execute the function that I passed to the button wrapper, and then also give it the arguments that I passed to the button wrapper. So what this is going to do now is I can say button wrapper, I can take store selected, put it there, and I can pass additional variables, you know, additional arguments to this stored selected function just via this button wrapper. So let's do that now, just so it makes a little bit more sense what's happening. Okay, so I can do something like, let's just give it a variable. Let's just say temp for now, okay? And we can do print temp. And if I just create a random variable here, just call this my variable. I'm just doing this as an example, and I'm just gonna give this a value of 10. And if I put my variable back here, so when I execute this, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna execute this store selected, and it's gonna pass my variable to that. So when I run this code, you can see when I hit this, you can see it's saying, well, it's giving an error at the moment. It says takes no argument, 1 is given. And that's because we forgot to discard the false Boolean that this command flag tries to pass. you got to remember it's passing that false value, that really annoying false value. So let's run this again. Now when I hit the button, it's still saying args is not defined. So that's because I typed the wrong thing there, silly me. Okay, let's run this again. Now it should print 10. Okay, so what it's doing is it's passing this argument to this function, and this function is this function. And this argument is this argument. And that's just coming through this. Okay, so it's just going to execute this little portion there. Okay, so hopefully you're following along still, but if not, you just kind of go back to the section where I explained how this wrapping is going on, because it is a little bit confusing. It's a little bit advanced, but once you write this button wrapper function once, you can use it anywhere down in your script. And I pretty much use the same button wrapper function, for all my scripts, and I don't need to modify this at all. Okay, so we don't want to actually, pass my variable there. What I actually want to do is store this text field in a variable. So I want to say selection text field, something like that. And I want to pass selection text field here. And rather than this being called temp, I'm just going to call this text field. And rather than printing the text field, I want to do cmds text field and adjust this text field. So I want to edit this. So I can say edit is equal to true. And what do I want to do? Well, I want to edit the actual text of the text field. And I can say, hello world, like this. So now when I run this code and I hit this button, it's going to adjust that text field to say hello world. And you can see how this is all panning out now, because we're storing this text field and we're adjusting this text field inside of this store selected function. And inside there, we're just saying, hey, I want to change the text to hello world. But let's not use hello world. I'm just showing you guys as an example of what's happening. I actually want to just take the selection that we have here and then adjust the text field so that it's using the selection name. So how do we do that? Well, what we can actually do, rather than using a fixed string there, we can actually do cmds.ls and ls_sl is equal to true. So we're storing our selection. So I'm going to say selection is equal to this, and then the text is equal to selection. And I just want to store my first selection, so selection 01. So now when I run this code and I hit this button, you can see it's storing the name of our cube. And that's exactly what we want. So now what we need to do is make this select stored button execute this select stored function, and then grab the name of this and then select it. Okay, so let's do that now. So we have this button wrapper function, which I'm going to just put down here so we can do this portion. And I'm going to grab this select stored, put it down there, because we're not storing selection, we're selecting the stored now. And I also want to grab this text field and put it down there. And in here, I want to say text field, so it accepts a text field argument. And then what I want to do is grab this code, just paste it down here. And rather than editing, I want to query. So I can say query like that, or just put Q. And I want to query the text. So I don't need to actually pass the text anything. I just need to say true. And then here, I can store the query text. So I can say text is equal to that. And if I just print text as an example, you can see what's going to happen. And let's close this, run this script again, store. And now when I hit this store selected, it's going to print whatever's in there. And I'm not actually getting anything because I'm not printing the text. So I need to actually print the text, silly me. So now let's store, and now let's print. And you can see it's printing the name of whatever's in that text field. And instead of printing the name, what I actually want to do is select the object. So I'm going to say cmds select txt, and let's replace our selection. with the R flag. So replace is equal to true. So now when I run this, I can store this, and now I can select it again. It's grabbing the name and it's selecting that object. And that's exactly what we want. So how do we get all these different fields? Well, I'm just putting everything in a for loop. So we can do exactly that. So I can put all this stuff in a for loop. So let's just say for I in range, let's use 5 because I want 5 of these selection fields. And let's tab all this in there. We don't need to tab the show window. And there's one last thing that we need to do before we run this, which is, let's just make sure. Yep, no, I think it's all good. Let's run it. And there we go. Now we have all these different fields. So if I have a bunch of different objects, I can store each one of these different guys inside of these fields, and I can select all these stored stuff. And you can see it's a little bit like clustered at the moment. It's a bit of a hard thing to see which button belongs to what. So we can use a little thing called a separator. So I can do cmds.separator. And what this separator will do is it will just create a line that separates all the widgets. So when I run this again, you can see I get a little separator there, but it's still not a lot of space. So I can give the separator some width, or some height rather. I can say height is equal to 20 and run this again. Now you can see there's a bit of height for that separation. And this is what we're getting. You get this little selector script here, and you can have as many as you want. You can put 10 there and run this script again, and now I get 10 selection fields down there like that. And if you guys wanted to go one step further, you can create a button that every time you hit the button, it actually creates a new selection group like this. But that's that's going to be a little bit more out of this tutorial because it's kind of running long already. But if that's something that you guys want to see, just make sure you comment down below. If you wanted to create a button that creates more of these rather than having a fixed thing in there. But yeah, that's that's it for this lesson. I think it's quite complicated to work with this command flag, and the easiest way and the most elegant way that I think is to use this button wrapper function, which kind of wraps the function and the variables that you want to pass to those functions. And you can bypass that whole annoyance with this command flag trying to pass a false boolean into your command. So yeah, by the way, if you guys enjoyed this and you want to see more advanced stuff like this, make sure you comment and subscribe. And every little bit helps us out. It's not easy doing these tutorials, and having the feedback from you guys really does give us a lot of encouragement. So thank you for your support up to now, and hope you guys have a good Christmas and a good New Year's. And if you guys are watching this in some random time in the year, then I hope you guys all the best for anything as well. Make sure you guys stick around.